Hello and welcome to another episode of Exchanges with me, Evan Lucas. Today I get to bring you the fantastic Pascale Helyar-Moray OAM. Yes, she has got an Order of Australia medal for all of her incredible advocacy work, particularly around women's finances and women's growth, particularly also in the super industry. And we haven't had a chance to do an Exchanges with super yet, and that's why Pascale is the perfect person to start this conversation and to have an exchange around it. Before I go any further, I do want to also mention that now Exchanges is actually being sponsored by the fantastic More app. More is a lifestyle by design app designed to give you all the features, tools, and incredible insights that you need to make sure that you can gain the lifestyle that you want through tracking your wealth, property, and overall financial situation. Check out More, that's moorr.com.au for more information around the app. But without any further ado, please now check into this week's Exchanges with Pascale. Pascale, welcome to Exchanges. Thank you so much for joining me. I really wanted to get you on because there's been a lot of discussion about super, and I'm so excited for what you've done with the book, and we'll come to Poor Women, Rich Women in a minute as well. But I really wanted to get your opinion about superannuation, why superannuation has basically been part of your life for the last 25 years for something that is probably not very sexy in terms of where it is. What about super has attracted you, and why has been this now almost, I think the word is crusade, would you say, for in terms of what you are doing going forward with how super works for particularly men more likely than women, particularly those that have a higher salary than lower salary, and particularly that those are working versus those that are not. Take me through your world and how super has become something that you're very, very passionate about.
Well, thank you for having me, Evan, and it's a real pleasure to be on and meeting you. We've had lots of chats digitally,
We
so
have.
it's great to actually be uh, connecting face to face. Um, Now, in terms of why super has become my crusade, because I do like that word, and I it does resonate with me. Um, I think that I am one of the lucky ones.
Hmm.
I think I'm one of the very lucky ones, in fact, and I fell into super by accident through, a function of where I was working, and, literally writing the brochures on compound interest and salary sacrifice and so on. And then I continued salary sacrifice through my 20s and 30s, and with the result that even though I stepped out of the workforce to have children and I've been in the startup world, which we know doesn't pay well and sometimes it doesn't pay at all, um, my super balance in is still bigger than that of my husband's, who
Nice.
has
Just
not had any career breaks. We good?
just what I wanted to go back, just before we go any further, just so for
Yeah.
people out there, can you take through exactly how salary sacrifice works? Because I think this is the other thing about the super industry is it has all these terms. You and I know them very, very well. We
Yes.
live and breathe by them.
Yes.
But the reason super is seen as, inverted commas, unsexy is
Yeah.
that it has a complexity that actually isn't that complex, right?
Correct. And yes, so number one, superannuation, the topic, it's as sexy as a dead fish to most people, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
and number two, superannuation. Look, the government and industry have done this fantastic job of making it seem incredibly complex. Number three, government and industry have given it the worst makeover of all time. Like you could not
I
find.
agree with you. That's so true. It is, and it's a terrible makeover, right?
Well, I mean, oh my gosh, let's think about the language, right? Um, Salary sacrifice. Already that sounds horrible. Then
Yeah. What are
reservation.
you sacrificing?
Yeah, I know. And
Sacrificing
then
my
transition
life to it? What?
and like it's just all alienating. And oh my gosh, if there's one industry that needs a radical makeover, like Australia's Next Top Model or something, it is this one. Um, but with all that said, um, salary with all that said, super is actually incredibly simple,
Hmm.
really simple. And I have just one rule, which is add as much as you can, as early as you can. That's it. That's all anybody needs to do. And now this
Do you
is not.
think the whole purpose of it though has also been lost? Like, do you think the original concept of what super was from a government perspective, not from
Yes.
a user perspective like you and I, which was it would slowly but surely over the decades and generations take pressure off government welfare payments. Do you think that's also been lost now? Do you think that super is also starting to become seen as an intergenerational wealth transfer and that it's not actually fit for purpose like it once upon a time was scheduled to be?
I No, I disagree. I do think it is maintained largely. I mean, we have had a few blips and flips along the way, like with the early access to super measures during COVID, but it was a pandemic. I do think that it has been a very a very wholesale push from the government bearing the responsibility of supporting the population in their retirement to the user having to support themselves in their retirement. I would actually go so far as to say that I don't think, and this is going to be controversial, so buckle up. I don't think that the standards set by ASFA in terms of their definitions of a modest or comfortable retirement, that, for example, they say roughly $45,000 a year is what you'll need in retirement for a comfortable retirement if you're part of a couple. I actually don't think those numbers are enough.
No, I'd agree. They are way too low.
They are
Like,
underbaked by some margin, and it is because that when the standard was created in 2004, we had a very different economic environment, and the assumption then was that when the standard ASFA standard was created, was that most people would own their home outright by the time they retired.
yep.
But now, here we are, 2025, that is not the case. So back, 2004, the average age of a first home buyer was 27. Now it's nudging up to 37. And so on a 30-year mortgage or, retiring at 67, more and more people are dipping into their super in order to pay off their mortgage, right? But what my personal bugbear with this issue is that the actual ASFA standard, the downloadable budget that people, use as their template or take to their financial advisor, etc., it doesn't have a line item in it for mortgage or rent payments. And that is, in my book, a massive, massive oversight.
Particularly considering a third of the country are renters,
Yes,
and
totally.
particularly considering that particularly single women between the ages of 45 and 65 make up a disproportionate amount of
Yes.
that third.
Yes.
That is a
Yes.
bit of an indictment to be sort of saying that. So, I mean, because that brings to the next part of the question is the other issue with super at the moment, where we are in the cycle, is that women are disproportionately underfunded in retirement, are they not?
Oh, massively, massively. And um, so the latest data says that from ASFA again says that a woman retires with 25% less super than a man. So if a
I
man
would have thought it was even more, unfortunately.
and not funnily enough, but happily enough, I should say, when I started, looking into this in great detail about 7, 8 years ago, the numbers then were a lot more stark. The numbers then were a woman was retiring with 42% less. So I take heart from this. We are moving in the right direction, but it is still a really big number. So
Yeah.
what does that translate to? Well, let's say he is retiring with 300,000, she's retiring with 225,000. But that's quite a big difference. And the reasons for it are because what we're effectively talking about with this discrepancy is the gender super gap. And so the reasons for the gender super gap, for our listeners who may not be aware, they are threefold. Number one, we've got the gender pay gap,
Mhm.
and then number two, we've got time taken out of the workforce, excuse me, time taken out of the paid workforce. Now that might be
Yeah.
for parental leave, but it also might be because you're looking after your elderly parents and you've exhausted your carers allowance. It might be because you've been so badly hit by the effects of menopause or perimenopause that you can't work full time anymore. And of course, when you're working part time, you're only contributing fractionally to your super as well. And the third reason is the types of work that women do. So more women work part time in order to accommodate family responsibilities than work full time. So all of these three things combined mean that women end up retiring with 25% less.
Yeah, because then it also comes to the next part of that problem is that you can jack up the compulsory super take all you want, and the current government wants to bring it to 12%. Obviously, at the end of this financial
Yeah.
year, 12% of a part-time wage is still never going to catch 12% of a full-time wage.
No.
And even with salary sacrifice, it's still an incredibly long, long way away. The other thing that you spoke about before that I just want to go back to that I think
Mhm.
needs to be discussed is that you talked about withdrawal from super, and we'll get to
Yes.
compound interest in a minute because it's
Yes.
something that I love to talk about as well. It's been attributed to Einstein, but it might not be true that he saw it as the eighth wonder of the world.
That's
But at
right.
the moment, there is the policy on the table from the opposition around the ability to withdraw up to $50,000 from your super to buy your first home.
That's right.
How do you see that playing out? Because I've got a very strong opinion on this, but I'd love to get yours first.
As in, do I think they're going to continue to have the First Home Super Saver scheme still available? Or
So what they're proposing is that you'll be able to, like COVID,
yeah,
withdraw
yeah,
$50,000 to
yes.
support your first, yeah. And so taking money out of super for this kind of thing, is this
Mm.
a good or a bad idea is the question.
Well, I mean, I think if we had Paul Keating on the call, the father of super, he'd be saying it's a horrible idea because his vision for superannuation was that it would remain untouched. Um, However, where we are is that we're in an environment where the average, housing is becoming increasingly, unaffordable, um, because property value and prices have far outstripped wages and so on. Um, I think whilst in principle, I don't like the idea of super being touched, except in emergencies, you could argue, okay, well, is buying a property an emergency? And the other reason that I don't have as fundamental an issue around First Home Super Saver Scheme as perhaps COVID early access is because you are actually just transferring your monies from one of your biggest assets, your super, into what's going to be another of your biggest assets. So there isn't the same ability to spend and be profligate with it, as we saw during COVID. So I don't know if you were aware of this, but there was some fascinating research that came out during COVID of how people were spending their early access monies, right? So for those listeners, it was you could access two tranches of $10,000 of your super during COVID. And there was a fascinating gender split in how that money was being spent. So women were spending it on um, groceries, bills, and clothing. Men were spending it on gaming, uh, gambling, and automotive items.
Mhm.
So you have this like even just and they were the top three sectors for each gender. Perhaps I may not be remembering them in the correct order, but what it showed to me was that there was this real kind of she's surviving with the way she's spending her money, and he's thriving. I mean, if you're spending on gambling and so on. So, um, but either way, regardless of gender, those monies were being spent largely on things that would not be accruing in value, right? And then
Mhm.
if we contrast that with the uh, first home super saver monies, you're investing your super into the second of, your life's greatest asset, your home. So I don't have a fundamental objection to that.
Yeah, for me, the interesting point about it is that it has been seen. by some in certain industries as another opportunity for a cash cow. You're also therefore putting a whole heap of demand back into what
Mhm.
happened when we saw the scrapping of the stamp duties in certain
Yes.
states up to 600,000. So you've got this scenario again where you'll actually just price increase
Yes.
on certain things and make it that much more difficult anyway for first homeowners to get in. And then it gets back to what we're about to talk about, which is compound interest. What we've seen on that, because that group that I'm glad you sort of spoke about, those that drew on
Yes.
their super during COVID,
Mhm.
they were more likely than not to have super balance sub 150 grand. They were sub 50 grand, most of them.
Yes.
And they now have basically
Even
no
less.
or minimal amount of super in there. And the compound interest over that period of time with what's happened in global markets and what's happened in the overall superannuation balances is a compound return of roughly 15%. Now, that is above and beyond trend. I get that.
Yeah.
But if you take that 50 grand out,
Right.
that will never go back into super. And therefore,
Yes.
the compound interest impact, coupled with the fact that you are going to still have higher levels of competition because demand is up, there is still no supply of housing. It's creating the same bottleneck problems that we've been going on for quite a while. So I know why it's so attractive. It certainly becomes quite an interesting discussion point. I've had a lot of people tell me that it's something they're really excited about and will change their vote. So it does work.
Yes.
My catch is the flip side is that
I
it's
know.
money outside of super for life. It's never going to go back in. It creates bottlenecks in a part of the housing market that's already under pressure anyway.
Yes.
And then you have another scenario once again where those that need that money most in the future will have missed out. So it's never a right answer, and I agree with what you're saying there with regards to, there's fundamental reasons for both sides. The catch is the whole concept of super is obviously forced savings is another horrible marketing term in terms of calling it something, but it does actually mean that you've got future and beyond money. So the next part of the discussion, obviously, with superannuation is, have we now got to a point where super is becoming way too valuable for those that have versus those that don't? Because the tax policies and
No.
the way that superannuation works for those that can salary sacrifice into it, which we've discussed,
Yes.
using it to basically, pay your 27,500 max every year co-contribution material, it's now become a system that is heavily geared to
Yes.
those that have rather than have not.
I couldn't agree more. Um, and I think part of that comes back to the education piece. It
Mhm.
and I I'm sure you would have found similar, Evan, that when you talk to people about super, um, and you just set out a few basic principles, and like y- who wants to hear about the dead fish? Just um, but I was presenting a couple weeks ago, and I was talking to the room, mostly women, and I was explaining how super's just a bucket, right? It's just a pot of money. It's got a wrapper around it, and anything that goes into that pot is only taxed at 15%, right? Versus your marginal tax rate, which can be up to 45%. So let's say you're a marginal tax, the highest marginal tax bracket. That means that anything in your super is already 30% ahead,
Yeah.
being 45% minus 15%. And that's before you even look at the asset performance, right? So it is just this incredible vehicle, which is why, but just knowing that piece of information, and to come back to one of your earlier questions, I realized I hadn't quite answered it. Salary sacrifice.
Yep.
So salary sacrifice is where I sacrifice, or I give up part of my pre-tax income, and I send it directly into my super. Well, rather, my employer sends it directly into my super. Now, why the heck would I want to do that? Well, two reasons. Number one, because of the tax advantage I've just described, where anything going to my super is only taxed at 15%. But number two, and again, a lot of people don't understand this, is that when I salary sacrifice, that reduces my tax payable. So it's not it's win-win. It's not just one win. I'm actually winning on both sides. I'm increasing my future wealth, but I'm also reducing the amount of tax I have to pay now.
Yep.
And when I explained this at this women's event a couple weeks ago, I, I swear I heard the thud of jaws hitting the floor because the pennies were dropping, the lights were going on above people's heads, and I thought, how is it that so many people just don't know this? And so I think it comes back to those who know take advantage, right? And that's why you have the wealthy getting wealthier, and those who don't know and don't take advantage. So to me, the core of the issue is superannuation literacy, which is, to if we come back full circle to the beginning of our conversation, is part of my crusade because I got lucky. I got very lucky. And I've been just by virtue of where I was working at the time, and I was, doing all the things and doing the salary sacrifice, and I think, gosh, but for a bit of knowledge, I just need to spend half an hour with a woman and I can potentially change her life's trajectory. Um, and that's all it is. It's just knowledge.
Yeah, it is. I'm going to ask you another question. Again, you can sort of bat it off if you think it's not there. The other thing that I find hard for superannuation for human beings, and this is my behavioral part of it, is you're talking about having now and having into
Oh,
the future.
yes.
And so this is the other part about the salary sacrifice. Again, horrible term, is that it does sound like and it does feel like you're giving up the now for something magical into the future. Human
Yes.
beings can't actually visualize the future
No,
very well at all.
no.
We are not geared to it. We are
Mhm,
physiologically not actually able to really conceptualize future.
mhm.
Is that the other part of the problem? Is that because, particularly again, and we need to look at this from a socioeconomics, is that the here and now for people, unfortunately, on lower incomes is so much more acute than
Yes.
those that can sacrifice, that do have the larger amount of money,
Yeah.
because reducing the now is not as much of a sacrifice, let's use that term, as it is for those on the lower. And this is again the behavior, but also is this why super is still unfortunately geared in the way that it is?
I I couldn't agree more. Like and particularly in today's day and age where we're so conditioned through social media for that instant
Yeah,
gratification, the instant
bingo.
and, e-commerce, like personally, I love nothing more than, shopping e-commerce sites late at night, and then you make the purchase and you're like, yes, I feel good. Um, and when we don't provision for our future, through making super contributions, you're just kicking the can down the road, right?
Yeah,
Um, and we all think, oh, that's never going to happen to me, right? But sadly, for women in Australia, particularly, 1 in 6 retires into poverty. That's an actual cold, hard fact. And it's quite dramatic. And maybe there's an element, particularly if they think, oh, so, well, we've mankind's been able to put a man or like a rover onto Mars, but we can't fix pensions for or retirement for women in this country. Like, what's with that? Or maybe it's assumed that somebody else is going to fix the problem. But speaking personally, I would rather err on the side of caution. I don't want to get to 65 or 67 and go, oh dear, oh dear, the government's done nothing. Oops. I don't want to get to that point, and I don't want my retirement to be dictated by my financial circumstances. Um, so, and when I present to women and men, I talk about one of the easiest way to stop that being able to interrupt the flow of funds into my super is to set up a direct debit from my bank account into my super on payday. Now, payday, that assumes that I'm working, right? But for people who aren't working, maybe, there's a regular allowance that they get, or maybe there's investment income, or maybe it's a benefit of some description. The point is that when a regular sum of money hits your bank account, you set up a direct debit from your bank account into your super that same day, because that way you can't be tempted to spend the money, and also you don't miss what you never had.
My next thing then is what we're sort of now getting towards and glossing over is financial education and financial literacy. I have spoken with many people on this podcast about just how poor financial literacy in Australia is. And the first question that really comes, we can change those that are already in it with, the kinds of programs that you offer and others
Yes.
out there, etc. But my bigger question for you is, when does finance literacy need to actually be taught? Because I would argue that
Wha-
it's in single digit age group and we are just not doing that.
No.
How do we change that societal view? How do we change the educational view that financial literacy is actually probably the most fundamental life thing that all people need to learn?
Well, firstly, I couldn't agree more on the financial literacy bit, because, whether, if you think about the school curriculum, right?
Yeah.
We're okay if we don't learn ancient history. Like, we're okay if we don't learn geography. But all of us, every day, we deal with money. We all will have, a budget we need to manage, whether we like it or not. We'll all want to go on holiday. We'll all want to, think about owning property at some point. So we need to be taught this stuff and taught this stuff properly. We need to learn about tax. We need to learn about super. Um, so I couldn't agree with you more about its importance, and also because the correlation between financial literacy and mental health is just so strong. Um, and so if we want, as a country, to stop having perhaps the same level of anxiety and depression. um, I'm not saying that it's only lack of financial education that causes these issues, but certainly there's a really strong correlation. Um, let's learn how to manage money, because it's so fundamental to well-being. So,
Yeah.
with all that said, um, I would, and I personally actually have I think my youngest child's school loves me because and that was a joke, because I'm constantly emailing them about financial literacy courses for kids. Um, I think we could start teaching budgeting and managing money, in year 5, year 6, and then with each year, years maybe 7 and 8, maybe that's where we start to learn about tax, because they'll be getting ready to, perhaps start earning, start working, and so on. And then, really, I'd love to see super taught in schools, because I really do feel that, um, as a 16, 17-year-old girl, if I knew at that point that the system was not set up for me, and that I'm going to, whether I like it or not, but I'm going to have to work harder, or I'm going to have to compensate for it for myself. I'd really love to know that at age 17, when I've got 50 years ahead of me to make up that deficit, rather than discovering this fact at, I don't know, 45, when my time scales to do something about it are so compressed.
So I want to therefore get to the book. So I mean the fantastic book that you've written, which is, Poor Woman, Rich Woman. Is it all about basically the steps that we've just discussed, or what in the book did you really want to convey to those out there listening?
Rich Woman, Poor Woman is really about how to get rich slowly with your superannuation. So it sets out, and this comes from, all the decades that I've worked in financial services, but also with a focus on superannuation. I've worked with government, fund managers, super funds, wealth advisors, but last, certainly not least, I've listened to literally thousands of stories and spoken to thousands of women about their super. And so I like to think that I have a unique perspective of having a real cross section of thoughts and insights and considerations from all those different stakeholders. So the point of the book was really to distill all those messages and also help women understand, and men, and because I wanted this to be a book that you could give to your daughter or give to your sister or whoever, help them understand that women are behind the eight ball when it comes to super in this country. And but for making a few small tweaks along the journey, like through salary sacrifice and direct debit, on payday and these sorts of things, um, that it is entirely possible, and I am living proof of that, to create your future and a retirement that you want, where you're not only able to avoid becoming the 1 in 6 statistic where women retire into poverty, but you can live the life that you want through your own choice. And that's why I called it Rich Woman, because rich to me doesn't just mean wealthy, it means having choice and
Hmm.
having freedom. Um, and so, you know, but for a few small tweaks and the knowledge, most fundamentally, the knowledge that the system is not set up for us, but there are things you can do to mitigate. That's really the message of the book.
And that's why it is an absolutely beautiful book. So, what I therefore always finish these discussions with, Pascal, is the one question that is quite broad, and I understand it's quite large, but is if you're in charge for just one day, what would you do?
Oh, I think this is such a great question. Am I limited to
No,
just
no, no, go your hardest. I mean, I've had people do all sorts of random things. So, whatever you think is what you would do, that's the answer.
I I would do three things. Number one, I would, for any female child being born, there would be like a girl bonus. So I don't know if you remember the baby bonus of 2007, 2008. Every child born in Australia was given, the parents were given
Hmm.
$5,000 or something, which they promptly went
Yep.
and spent on new TVs. But anyway, for every female child, in recognizing that the super system isn't set up for her, there would be like a small amount of money. Maybe, I don't know, I need to do the numbers. Maybe it's $3,000, and that's locked into her super from she set up with a super
From day
account
dot.
from the word go, right? And that $3,000 is going to help mitigate the 25% super gap. Number two, when it comes to antenatal classes, I say we spend less time on the bloody birthing plan because that's going to go out the window anyway. And we have a financial literacy section and on, what
Budgeting for children.
budgeting for children. And guess what? Lady, you're going to be out of work for at least, I don't know, 6 months. It might be 12. You might never go back to work because child number two comes along, whatever. But recognizing that, hey, hubby, here are the spousal, super splitting forms. Let's fill those out right now.
Hmm.
And number three, um, I would with marriage, I would, or even de facto arrangements, I would implement some like financial contracts around that so that whatever anybody had coming into the marriage is theirs, and whatever is accrued during the course of the marriage is um, pooled. And in the event of separation, everything is just split down the middle. But that's all.
That that's fantastic. I mean, I haven't had that broader answer for that question. So that I actually think is there's some incredible policy frameworks around what you've just said there, and that I think would be something very much that should be talked about, not just through something like this, but actually more in the halls of Canberra. Because again, you're right. The difference from accruing interest and compound
Yeah.
for your first point over a 67-year period versus a 50-year period, so between being born and turning 17, is is immense. So that is a fantastic answer. Pascale, that has been an incredible talk. Thank you so much for joining Exchanges.
Thank you for having me, Evan.
What an episode. Pascale has some incredible insights, and her history and her time in the industry also makes her the perfect person to really talk about why super can absolutely give you the lifestyle that you want into the future, and the techniques and the things that we need to do to make sure that super works. She's honest. She does tell you very clearly that super isn't absolutely perfect, and that is true. But overall, it shows what she's telling you is that, particularly for women, super needs some form of additional increase. Super also is the way forward for you. Again, to you guys out there, thank you so much for watching. We love having you out there listening and watching through all the different channels. And with that, please don't forget, please hit the subscribe. We know that about 75% of you listening still unfortunately don't subscribe. So for that, please just give us a subscribe or even just a like so we can continue to do these. If you've also got any questions or other ideas around how we can do exchanges, please don't forget exchanges@evanlucas.com.au will get you there. But once again, thank you to Pascale, and thank you for all of you out there listening. We'll see you next week.